Welcome back to another episode of Trade Talks. In some previous episodes, we've talked about how important it is to build strong trade relationships as a new exporter. If you are a new exporter and you're wondering, okay, that's great, I understand how important it is to have these strong trade relationships, but you don't know how to get started with actually building those trade relationships, this episode is for you. We're going to be talking about some practical tips for building trade relationships as a new exporter or even an experienced exporter new to a different market. And we have a great chance to talk about this in the context of the Egyptian market today with Jason Fearneyhough, our CEO and executive director, and Richard Zurba from Zurcom International, WUSATA's in-market contractor for the African market, as they are both on the ground in Egypt right now for an outbound trade mission that is taking place here at the end of April. We are really excited to talk to them today about some general tips for building strong trade relationships and then get into some specific context for the Egyptian market. So, like I said, if you're a new exporter or someone who's got some experience but looking to explore some new markets, this will be a really practical, handy episode for you. Jason and Richard, thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany. Good to be here.
All right. So, Jason, I'm going to get started with a general question for you. And for new exporters or even experienced exporters looking for new markets, what's really the first step in building a meaningful trade relationship before they ever get to the point of making a sale?
Well, I think it probably varies from relationship to relationship, but I would say that the first thing, honestly, when you're looking from the US into a new market, is to try and get to know the market. And there's a variety of ways to do that. As you just mentioned in your introduction there with Richard here, there's opportunities that we've sought to utilize some of the expertise that we have with our end market contractors to do exactly that. But I think, as you look out into the world, this probably should go without saying, but it doesn't always really go without saying. So I'm going to say it. And that is, relationships are key when we're talking about exporting. Outside of the US, it is in almost every market, if not every market I've ever been involved in. The folks that you are dealing with, just like we do in the United States, they want to know who you are. They want to know who your family is, all those things. And Richard can dive into that as we get going here. But, it is so important to have a basic understanding of the market. And sometimes that's a little more difficult to do than it sounds like it should be. And that's why we utilize people that are actually in the market to help us and help people that are existing and new to export to understand the markets that we're trying to get into.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Richard, I would imagine that all applies to the Egyptian market specifically. But as we're looking at Egypt, does that first step for building trade relationships change at all?
Yes, getting to know the market is very key. You want to see that your product is actually going to be acceptable into the market. It's got a feasibility that when you come in and you travel, you want to have the probabilities in your favor, and that's a really key thing. The next thing is, once you've looked at finding the the applicability of your product in the market, you want to build relationships. And I'm always one that believes that people of good character, doing business with people of good character, create good business. And it's our job as in-market contractors to filter out all the nonsense. And first of all, to provide good information in market research that companies need to get in and understand whether their product has a good match for the market, and then to find the right people who are good matches for them to carry their product in the market. And so there's a variety of means of connecting and tying your product in to a new market. Some companies are going to be sending intermediary type products into the market. Others are going to be sending finished goods. It's going to depend, but the key thing is applicability and relationships. Those are the two things that are really core.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, Richard, you mentioned filtering out the nonsense. When we're looking at new exporters trying to build relationships, what are the most reliable ways for them to vet potential importers, distributors, or buyers for their product?
A good thing is, first of all, to look at their longstanding business and see how long they've been in business, understand what they're doing. Good business people stay in business longer. And here in Egypt, for example, a lot of businesses are family-owned business. They stake their family's reputation on what they do publicly. And it's important for them to have that continuity in family, that their family represents their business represents their family. And so, when you meet people and they've been in business for 20 or 30 years, that's a good thing. But young companies also can provide a really good conduit into a market, but it takes a bit more of a character assessment, understanding a bit more of the cross-cultural ways and means that you're going to have to understand to get to know those people a little bit better. We always will recommend that you do a good thorough background check before you do business with anybody particularly, and that across Africa we often within our staff will do background checks for companies coming into our African markets. We do not want one company to be involved in any kind of corruption or malfeasance or anything like that. So we're going to help them find partners that do not participate in that, keep them away from that kind of activity, and are able to provide a multi-generational timeline for doing business with the market.
Great. Yeah, I think that's all very good advice. And we'll get into some of the cultural nuances of Egypt in just a minute. But switching gears back to a little bit more general of a topic first, Jason, when you are seeing companies meet a new potential trade partner for the first time, what do you see successful exporters do to really help establish trust quickly?
I think that, establishing trust quickly can happen really the best way face to face. So, it's like that's probably not the first step in the relationship because has to, you have to know that you're going to go into a market and all of those things. But I really think that it is key to building trust to have some touch with the people that you're going to be doing business with. And that's on both sides. And it's one of those things where, as Richard said, in many of these markets, especially where we are today, that, when you're in a family business, the folks that we're dealing with in Egypt, in this case, in particular, are staking their family reputation on things, as just been said. So you want to make sure, though, that you're finding the good ones. And the best way to do that, I think, is number one, be willing to go to the market after you've understood it a little bit, maybe even not expecting sales right out of that first meeting, but to get to know who it is that you're doing business with. It's a lot harder to trick someone in a sense if they've done if you know who you're dealing with. So that would be my recommendation is if you're interested in a market, as Richard was talking about the applicability, first of all, find where your goods are applicable. And then utilize the systems we have in place and our expertise and the expertise that, in this case, throughout Africa, Zurcom brings to the table through us to help vet those folks, but get to know them face to face if you can.
Yeah, that face to face time is so valuable. And that's why things like this outbound trade mission you guys are on right now is such a great opportunity, I think, for companies to go out and have that face to face time with those potential buyers. And so, on that note, Richard, getting back to the Egyptian market, what are some of those key cultural or maybe business etiquette tips that exporters should understand to maybe avoid missteps when they're looking to strengthen their trade relationships in a market like Egypt?
Always understand that America has the benefit of being a very high trust society. We can walk into almost any place in our communities and be trusted simply by being in place. And that's important. That doesn't exist everywhere in the world. We have to understand that. Egypt is a place where you can find those high trust people, and it's partly our job to help you find them. But we want you to find people that are going to create that long-term relationship, and that creates a building blocks on both sides. There's a responsibility on both sides for that, and it doesn't mean going for one meeting and asking for the sale. Often it'll mean getting to know what the company is, seeing what their production lines look like, visiting their offices, having a cup of tea, talking about all kinds of things. But Egyptian people are incredibly hospitable in terms of their businesses. We've had a group of the delegates were invited out this evening to a company's home and for a really nice supper. And we've been invited out for a tea to a company who is inviting us over to their home again for another brief meeting. But the meetings are not really to talk about business. They're really to talk about who you are. Getting to know people in a different society often means that you've got to work on understanding that character and to understand that through a cultural lens which you'll be building on as you spend more time in the country. And that's really important to understand.
Yeah, I think you kind of nodded to this, but it's a long game that you're playing. It's not get in there, meet them once, and go home. It's something that you're working on building that relationship over time for a long time to come. So, kind of on that note, what is the best way to, after that initial deal is done, you've made that first sale. How can a company continue to stay engaged with those trade relationships that they are starting to build in that market over time?
Travel, get back into the market, visit every, I don't want to say every few months, but do it more than once a year. And if it's not the business owner, then it could be somebody that has been allocated to do that job and to build those relationships. Personal connection is everything. Maintaining that personal connection is very important. And then providing insights. That's really important. Becoming a business partner means not just selling something to somebody, it's actually helping them to educate themselves about the market. So getting them to understand the nuances of doing business with the United States, getting them to understand what trends might be happening in the US, getting them to know what your company can offer as you're changing the dynamics of your business as it's growing, those kinds of things. So having market insights is really key to maintaining that relationship, always having something to educate your business partner about is really important. And in turn, that relationship will develop into something where they're feeding you as well. They're indicating new markets. You're working together in building new markets. Egyptians are not all about just Egypt. Egypt is a market that is really radically working toward exporting into other markets. And so it sees itself as a regional distribution point for reaching into the Middle East, to Africa, to Europe, and those kinds of things. And so understanding how you can do that through an Egyptian exporter is really important, as they in turn are importing your products into their production lines. And that's really a key thing. Not everybody who is an importer is an exporter. Not everybody who's an exporter is an importer. But that's something that you have to understand, that when you're talking with a lot of these multi-generational businesses, they've got a lot of fingers and a lot of pies.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, just to wrap up, I would like to get both of your perspectives on this. What are some of the most common mistakes that you often see maybe new exporters making when it comes to building trade relationships, and how can our companies avoid those mistakes? So, Jason, we'll start with you.
I think Richard just touched on this a little bit. I think back to early on in my childhood, my mother insisted that on any occasion where something was received, you met somebody that or a gift was received, your thank you note, or you reached out again and said, hey, this is here, not just that when you receive somebody with something, but when you met somebody new. And I think one of the things that I see that does happen is exactly opposite of what Richard just described we should do. And that is, somebody comes, they come into the market, maybe they didn't get a sale right away and they just drop it, and
Mhm.
they don't reach back out. In my experience, which is ever gaining on these things, I've been doing this for a long, long time, but there's oftentimes I've seen something happen years after a first meeting. There may have been nothing that was gaining traction, but people stayed in contact, and all of a sudden it was either that opportunity that they were seeking originally did open up, or something else came out of it. So that would be my advice, is that, make sure that you stick to it and that you continue to reach out to the new friends that you make in new markets. And people not doing it is, to me, a big mistake, and one that's it's simple to correct.
Yeah, that makes sense. Really playing the long game there.
Mhm.
Richard, anything that you see that's a common mistake that exporters are making and how they can avoid those?
I would say that one of the common mistakes is being afraid of making mistakes. We've got to effectively, most companies that go out and do new business are pioneering a new market. They're made to be trying something for the first time, and often if they're looking at being an American exporter into a new market, they might be the first American exporter into that market, particularly when we're talking about Africa, or they might be the first one into a specific sector. And mistakes will be made, and we just have to understand that. But through that, there's a learning challenge that really adds into getting into the market eventually, and understanding the market and doing the right thing with the right place. Interestingly enough, mistakes in one market will provide lessons to gaining traction in a lot of other markets. What you learn as a business person is going to have really wide-ranging benefits to being a global exporter. And I think that that's critically important. So don't be afraid to get out there. Understand you've got agency. You are able to work and do things that other people just cannot. As global entrepreneurs, exporters are unique people. And I think that the ability to learn to overcome hurdles is something that they're used to, but perseverance through what may be perceived as mistakes, but are part of the learning curve is just something to always understand.
I think that's a really great tip and great advice from both of you for all of our companies out there listening to this. Before we close out, I do want to mention, and Jason, you kind of nodded to this a little bit earlier, how valuable it is for us to have these in-market contractors like Zurcom International, who are boots on the ground for us, really gathering key insights about that market, who know the market inside and out. We actually have contractors in 9 markets throughout the world, some of those markets being huge regions like Africa or ASEAN. So all of our companies out there who are listening, if you do have questions about specific markets, we can connect you with our contractors who are on the ground in those markets to get you those key insights that you need or those cultural nuances that would be helpful as you're approaching new markets. And we're happy to make those connections. So please leave a comment or reach out and we'll help get you connected where you need to be. But Jason and Richard, thank you so much for joining me. Any final thoughts before we close out on building trade relationships?
If I could, and maybe a little bit different than your question, Tiffany, is that since we are here in Cairo, I'd really like to ask Richard how he feels this what I think is an outstanding trade mission is going from his perspective. It's been exciting. We have companies here that are dealing with seafood and companies here that are dealing with food ingredients. A very challenging thing to do to bring in a trade mission that has multiple things, but it has just been, from my perspective, Zurcom's knocked it out of the park. WUSATA has worked hard. Our partner states in California and Washington that have been working on this have done an excellent job. But I wondered if Richard, if you wouldn't mind, Tiffany, if he could maybe just give his insights on what we've seen here and while we've been here this week.
Really, the first thing is having a reliable team that understands everything that we spoke about in this discussion. We have a really good country manager in Sandra Matty. We have good staff people in a range of staff that are also working here with the mission. That's really the key thing. I do want to say they're people of good character. They really want what is best for our American exporters when they come in. And the other thing is understanding what is appropriate, finding what works, and then getting excited about that and trying to work through that. So that's something. Never lose your sense of adventure. When we're looking at new things, we take it with joy. We don't want to cringe from doing new things. The world is continuously changing, and we want to be on top of that, looking at all the trends and understanding where we can put people who are exporting into the future, not into the past with statistics, but riding all the trends so that we can help them towards sales. That's the key.
Great. Well, I'm glad to hear that the outbound trade mission in Egypt is going so well. I'm glad to hear that the U.S. suppliers who are there are making great connections with the Egyptian buyers. I hope to see lots of great trade relationships come out of that mission that you guys are on right now. So one more time, thank you, Jason and Richard, for joining me today. It's been great to get your advice and your tips for building trade relationships in markets around the world. So thank you again, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany.